Hi everyone, Aiden here at the Etrailer. Today we're going to be taking a look at and showing you how to install the Thule TracRac SR truck bed ladder rack with cantilever on our 2023 Ford F-150. Now this is going to be a really unique option because it's a very heavy duty ladder rack with tons of adjustability front to back, but that cantilever up front is the piece that extends over the cab, giving us more usable space and support for longer loads, whether it be a really long ladder, lumber, conduit, any sort of elongated items that we don't have room for in the truck bed. It can go above it and extend over the cab with that extra support so everything is secure when we're going down the road. Let's check it out. Now, some of the things I like about this, the capability and the ease of use. Capability, it's got a really heavy weight capacity. It can support 1,250 pounds, evenly distributed across the whole thing. Now, if you're including the cantilever in that, that's going to be 1,000 pounds. So if you're just supporting your load over the main uprights, you get a little bit more capacity out of it. And if you need that longer support, that cantilever out there can support 1,000 pounds. So just make sure you're not overloading it, but it's certainly capable for the job site application. Now, the other thing is how easy it is to set up. There's plenty of tie-down points, and the included load stops make sure that everything is rock solid. You've got tie-down points on every single upright that we're utilizing to secure our ladder right now, and the load stops up top also have hook ends and loop ends so you could feed a rope through there or a strap if you've got a taller load. But as it stands right now, the fact that those load stops are there against the sides of our cargo mean that it's supported side to side really well, and a well-placed ratchet strap is going to keep it held down against the ladder rack. So this is not going anywhere. So we've got a 12-foot ladder loaded up right now, and our ladder rack is pretty much extended to the widest position it could possibly go. And it's pretty much a perfect fit for that ladder. So that's going to give you a better idea of what kind of loads it can handle on your F-150. Now, while we're talking about measurements, it is good to know the height and the width. So from the bed rail to the top is 27 and 5/16 of an inch, and the crossbars themselves are going to be 69.5 inches long. It's also important to mention that this kit is designed for the 8-foot bed, so if you don't have an 8-foot bed, be sure to check our website and find the right kit for you. Ease of use is a big deal here. These load stops, loosen up with a hand knob, slide back and forth along that track, and when you've found a place you want it, just tighten it down, and it's rock solid. So getting this moved and customized to your cargo is going to be really quick and easy to do. Plus, these are all metal, so you don't have any little plastic bits here in contact with your cargo. It's going to be built really well. The aluminum construction is going to keep things lightweight and resistant to rust over time. And one of the things I really like about the construction and just the overall build quality is how well everything fits together. You'll see that a little bit more later in the install process, but that's going to mean minimal gaps for wind noise to get in, keeping this quiet on the roof, and the bars do have a rounded shape which will help air travel over them a bit smoother and keep it from being loud and obnoxious going down the highway while this is on your truck. And perhaps one of the biggest benefits you get with the TracRac is the adjustment that you get with it. You don't have to fully remove this whenever it's not in use if you don't want to. You can actually slide this back crossbar to the cab of your truck to make room for loads in the bed, or just adjust the crossbar spread for different accessories if you need it. There's going to be 2 hand knobs on the bottom of your uprights that you can just loosen up. And once they're both loose, just kind of lift up and move this front to back. Now, it might get bound up a little bit. The key is to kind of grab it by the crossbar there and lift up in the direction that you're going. So I'm trying to lift the front of that upright upward so that it doesn't bind up, but every now and again it does bind. Still though, this process is leaps and bounds easier than having to fully uninstall it every time you're done using it or need the extra room. When you've got it in the stored position, just retighten it to make sure it doesn't go anywhere on both sides, and then you're good. It does take up a little bit of space, obviously, but if you've ever used a canister style tonneau cover, or even one of the trifold ones, it's no more space than something like that would take up. So it does leave the majority of your bed open for use and taller items. So if you need to walk back and forth to maybe tie something down or load the bed up, then you can. And then when you're ready to go again, just loosen this up and you can slide it back out, which I think is honestly the easier part because the way the feet are oriented, it's easier to slide it this direction. As far as the installation goes, the whole system kind of relies on this base rail. That's going to provide the tracks on which the uprights are able to slide and serve as our mounting device. This is a no-drill application though. Your truck's stake pockets are going to serve as the attachment points where we drop in some blocks that actually expand in those stake pockets and keep this solidly mounted. So the installation process is going to be pretty straightforward. I know I've talked about it a couple times now, but it's about time we go through the whole process together, walk you through it, and see how it sets up. The first thing you want to do for your install is go to your bed rails and locate all the stake pockets. More than likely, you're going to have some covers on there, so just grab yourself a trim panel tool, and you can get those popped out. These are in there pretty firmly, so just get it in the front or back, apply a fair amount of pressure to get that flexed, and pop it out. You can set these to the side. You can save them if you want, but if you're leaving that ladder rack on, you're probably not going to ever need these again. Those 3 stake pockets that we removed the caps from are going to correspond to 3 mounting holes on the base rail here. Now, in each section for the front, back, and middle, there's going to be a large cluster of mounting holes. Your kit comes with instructions and a diagram that breaks down what all these are used for, because each one is going to correspond to a different year, make, model of truck, because this is designed to be used with many trucks. So to make it a little bit easier for us, I went through that diagram and I marked out the holes that we're going to need with a little bit of white electrical tape. Painter's tape will work just fine too, and that's going to make it easier to just see what we're doing. We can also use that diagram to determine which one is going to be the front and the back. But for the back, we've got a cluster of 4 mounting holes, and at the very front, we've got a cluster of 5. And I just used that diagram to see which way they're arranged to know which one of these rails was for the driver's and passenger side. Once we've got all that done, we can put our hardware in. One thing you might notice in your kit, as far as hardware goes, are these plastic shim plates. Depending on your truck, you might need them to go underneath the base rails and level it out on the truck bed rails. Our specific truck today does not need it. So if you're watching this for a different vehicle, just check the instructions and see if you need them or not. We're going to ignore these for now though. And the hardware we need is really simple. We've got a long bolt with a plastic washer that we can pop on and drop that through the designated hole for each position. Underneath, we're going to have these rubber blocks with a oblong side and a circular hole. The circular hole, we want to just pass through that bolt. And there's a plate that we can thread on underneath, keeping it only hand tight for now. We don't want this to be compressed at all. So I'm just going to tighten it up until it makes contact with that rubber block and no more. And we'll repeat that for all 3 locations. With all of those blocks assembled underneath, we can drop this into the stake pockets. Again, just making sure we have the proper orientation front to back and side to side. Now you might notice that it's a little bit of a snug fit, but that's okay. It's kind of what we're looking for here. And just check that everything's running evenly front to back. Now you may have noticed that this one is running crooked for us. I got myself a little turned around there and used the wrong mounting hole. So this is why we double check everything. And a good way to tell if it's just looking a little bit off, this whole inside rail should for the most part be running completely parallel to the bed rail. So if it isn't, you know you're probably using one of the wrong mounting locations. And here's what that more even application should look like when all the correct mounting holes are being used. There's still going to be a little bit of overhang, probably on the outside edge because of how much that bed rail tapers and how wide this is. But again, look to that inside edge and you'll be able to tell if it's even or not. Before we tighten down these base rails on either side in the stake pockets, we need to take a couple measurements and check to make sure things are running parallel and even. The first thing is to make sure the bars are running parallel to one another. So we're going to take two measurements, one at the cab end of the truck and one at the tailgate end, going from the inside edge to the inside edge of one base rail to the next, and making sure that those measurements match up to one another within a 1/16 of an inch. So on ours, we're actually looking perfect, spot on for that. And the next thing we need to check is that the tops of these are even. Now, if you use those shims for your truck bed installation, then you might not need this step because you already did that, but right at the very edge, you can probably see what we're talking about right there, where this rail needs to come up a little bit on the end. You basically want all 4 of these tracks, 2 on each base rail, to make contact with some sort of flat surface. The crossbars that come in your kit aren't long enough to touch all 4 at the same time, so we're just using a crossbar we had laying down in the shop for a nice straight edge. But at home, you can use something like a really long level, 2x4. If you just make sure that it's all straight and reliable, then you'll be good to go. Now, if you need to level this out, your kit is going to come with these thinner leveling strips that are rubber and have some adhesive on the back. So you can use those where applicable to level out that base rail and make sure that the top of them is running parallel from the ground. Now for this, it could help to have an extra set of hands to help you wedge this underneath, but it's not entirely necessary. You can do it on your own. Just make sure it's got a good stick, and we can recheck to see if this is more level now. Again, within plus or minus 1/16 of an inch. And there we can see we're looking much better. There's still a very minor gap in there, but it's within the parameters we're looking for. So I'm just gonna go down the line of this base rail on both sides and repeat this process for basically each of the 3 mounting locations. So we'll go to the middle next. Once you've taken those measurements and checked for level, we can start to tighten down the hardware here. I'm going to use the provided tool and then put a 5/16 socket on the end of it and apply a little bit of downward pressure while I tighten this down. Now I'm not going to tighten it fully. Once it's mostly snug, I want to just retake those measurements and re-verify that everything is still level before I fully tighten and torque it down to the specifications in our instructions. We'll repeat that process for the back tailgate end and the middle location last. Now the reason we recheck everything after partially tightening it down is things can change. At the cab end of the truck here, we actually added those spacers that weren't previously there because everything looked level. But once I started tightening things down, some things came out of level and now they're needed. So we rechecked, corrected it, and now we're ready to torque everything down at the cab end. Again, once it's torqued up here, repeat that process of partially tightening, checking, then torquing for the tailgate end, then the middle. With everything torqued down, we can go back through and pretty things up a bit. Your kit's gonna come with a ton of these little plugs that just pop into these access holes. One of them, of course, will cover up the head of that bolt that we just tightened and torqued down, and the rest will just be plugging the empty holes. And just repeat that for all the other access holes. Now at the cab end of these base rails, you're gonna notice some threaded holes, and the bag of hardware does come with these small Allen screws. So just get those started and tighten them down using a 5mm Allen key. These aren't structural, so they don't have any torque spec. These are just safety stops, so when you get the uprights in and we're sliding it forward towards the cab, that's our stopper to make sure it never goes past. Each base rail is going to have 2 of these, and on the tailgate end, leave them uninstalled for now. We want to do that after the uprights are installed. Now we can start assembling our uprights and our crossbars. Now, you want to determine which one is which because they are side specific. So we want this to be tapering in towards the middle of the truck bed. So on the uprights, it's going to look kind of like this where it tapers in. And these feet, we want to be facing in towards each other. So this one right here is going to be meant for the cab side, all the way up towards the front, with this base shifted and pointing towards the back. And for the one on the tailgate side, it's going to be facing the other way. Now, for our rear crossbar, the one that's by the tailgate, this is going to come ready to go. You don't have to do anything to this besides start attaching it to the crossbar. For this front one, we need to attach a different set of brackets that our cantilever can attach to. This one's going to be just a little bit different and offer additional mounting holes. Now to do that, there's going to be 2 screws that are located in the top that we need to remove, and then use new ones to attach this new piece. Now I'll be honest with you, these are in there. You can see we've got one removed already, so we'll show you what that second one removal looks like and how to do it safely, because we did break an Allen key trying to do it the first time. There's just a lot of tension there, and because of the thread locker they use, it's going to fight you for the first little bit. So let's take it to the ground and show you how we got it undone. So you can take your Allen key and get it set in place, and we're using a really long ratchet extension with a socket on the end to basically act like a breaker bar. I know it seems silly for just an Allen screw like this, but it's really in there, and going slow and having the extra leverage is what's going to make this doable. Once you break past the initial bit of the thread locker there, it's going to be a lot easier. I can show you one of the ones we removed and how it compares to the new ones. So all of that stuff that's not on there anymore is what we had to fight through to get it removed. So when you get that one removed, set it to the side and install the new top piece with the new hardware. But just go slow, and eventually this will get undone and we can pop it out. Eventually it'll get loose enough that you can pull it off by hand, and there you can see that thread locker that has been worn away that we had to fight through. And just take a second to take notice of how this piece is attached and make sure it's in the proper orientation, because the new one is going to need to go on the same way, basically so that it sits level when it's in that track. If you install it backwards, it's going to be angled really far upward. So just make sure you don't do that on accident, because you don't want to have to fight those bolts back out again. So grab your new hardware. It's the exact same as the old one, and we can start to hand thread it in on either side, and we'll go back through, fully tighten it down, and repeat for the other upright on our front crossbar assembly. Now I've got this mostly assembled onto the crossbar right now because these holes are slotted in the new brackets for the front crossbar assembly. For the rear crossbar assembly, the ones that come pre-installed, these are holes rather than slots so they won't slip out. But anyway, we've got a short screw and a square nut that's going to get loosely attached right here, and it's going to slide into the channel on the underside of the crossbar. And you can tell it's the underside because there's these 2 ridges right here and here that match up with 2 ridges, and that's why we are mostly assembling it right now, because it will just kind of fall out. But you see the ridges there match up. That's how we know we've got the correct facing crossbar, and the top here just has one large ridge on the end. With everything loosely assembled, I'm going to actually lift it up onto the base rack system here, going to the outside tracks for this crossbar assembly, just in hopes that it's going to hold itself together a little better and we don't have everything fall apart like you just saw because of those slotted holes. So it's going to be best to grab a friend here and kind of lift up and hold those bolts in place underneath while we get the track slid in on the bottom. So once we get it started, we can scoot it forward, making sure we kind of just go evenly from side to side. If it gets bound up on one side, chances are it's just not sliding at the same time. But we'll get this most of the way in. Just right there is good, so it holds itself in place. We can kind of get the crossbar situated we'll get the cantilever started to be assembled and tighten things up. So we can take this cantilever arm and this bracket here that has 2 threaded holes on the bottom and 6 threaded holes on the back, plus 6 of these smaller screws that come in the bag with all of the cantilever parts. And you'll notice again, we've got a series of ridges on there and a series of ridges here. Match those up, line the holes up, and get all of these 6 screws started hand tight. And as we get the last one hand tight, I'm gonna go back through and tighten them all up. But Thule wants you to go in a certain order, kind of a star-shaped pattern, starting at the bottom left, up, down, across, and back down. With all those tightened down, you'll notice that when we kind of face this the correct direction, facing forward, that the threaded holes down here are pointed towards the bottom. That's going to line up to that bracket we attached to our uprights. So this one, when it attaches in like that, is going to be for the driver's side. We'll get this all set up and repeat the process on the passenger side, just having it be a mirror image of this. Now these cantilever pieces will attach to these brackets using these longer screws with the Allen key head. Now before you do that, I figured now that we've got it in the track system here, these are running parallel, and we know that thanks to the measurements we took earlier. So I just went back through and tightened down the hardware in these slotted holes here just to keep it still. I don't want this falling apart, especially once we start attaching more pieces to it. So once you've got that done, we can take this extending forward towards the cab, slide it over the crossbar, and those threaded holes should line up with these holes on the bracket underneath. And again, just start by hand tightening them on either side, and then come back through with a tool and tighten it up. Now for the crossbar that goes on those cantilever arms, there's going to be a series of T-bolts. 4 of the silver ones that are a little bit more narrow on the bottom. That's going to slide into the underside of that crossbar. And you'll know which side is which because the top side is a lot wider. So put 2 on one side and 2 on the other side. Leave those just loosely in place for now. I'm gonna flip it over real quick and take the wider T-bolts, these black ones, and we're gonna slide those into the top channel. You'll know it's the top because these won't fit in the bottom channel at all. So again, just 1 for each side, and then we can take it up to those cantilever arms and get it loosely assembled, making sure that we bring a couple of these nuts and washers with us. At the front of those cantilever arms, there's going to be 2 slotted holes, one on the top, one on the bottom. That's where those T-bolts are going to slide into. Have a 9/16 inch socket or wrench ready to go along with your hardware. And we can lift the crossbar into place. Just kind of sliding it in, sandwiched between those arms. And when we've got it roughly where we want it, take one of those T-bolts on the bottom and kind of push it into that slotted hole, the one on the top, and then follow it up with your hardware on the bottom, and then slightly different set of hardware for those top T-bolts since they are a little bit more narrow. Just tighten up all the hardware on all sides of the crossbar here, and we'll come back through after that and add our extra support brace to the remaining T-bolt that's still just poking out underneath the crossbar here. Now this support brace is going to attach underneath where that remaining T-bolt is. Just hand tight for now is fine because we want this to have some movement. That way we can line it up to this remaining hole on the cantilever arm right there. Grab our bolt with a hex head and locking washer, and again, just loosely attach this. We'll come back through with our 9/16 wrench and socket for this, and then the socket for the nut over here, tightening it up, and of course repeating on the other side. Now that the cantilever's all assembled, we can turn our attention back to the crossbar assembly here and just tie up a few odds and ends. The only things that remain are a small support brace on the inside that will attach, our load stops up top, our tie-down points on the outside of the uprights, end caps for the crossbar, hand knobs for the bases, and setting the final position front to back, and of course doing the second crossbar assembly, which is going to be the same process as this first one, just excluding all the steps that we took to install the cantilever. So it's really just the uprights, the crossbar, and then all these odds and ends we're about to do now. Now once you've got your rear crossbar assembly put together and on the track, you can take those small Allen screws we used earlier to basically act as a stopper on the end of the track and install them. Now, a small correction from earlier, we actually installed all 4 of these at the cab end of the truck. There's actually only 2 for the cab end and then 2 for the tailgate end. I just miscounted the hardware earlier. So on the tailgate end, you only need to install them on this section where this track is being used. And then on the front, we're going to install them in that side, because even if we slid this rear crossbar all the way forward, it would hit the other crossbar and upright before it slid off of this track. So we'll need the stopper on one side for each track. With the stoppers in place, I'm just going to slide this as far back as it'll go, tighten down the hand knobs to secure it, and then we can clean up all of our tools and we're done with the installation. Overall, it's a really straightforward process. The thing I like about it the most is the ease of adjustment that you get and the fact that the installation doesn't require any drilling. So it's a very easy single day project to get you up and running with a nice heavy duty adjustable ladder rack. I think it's going to be a really solid fit on our 2023 Ford F-150. Thanks for watching.